thoughts, opinions, and general overall shade thrown on High at 9 News are those of the individual speakers and not those of High at 9 News, its audience, or its advertisers. The statements made do not constitute medical, legal, or financial advice, and for advice tailored to your specific situation, please consult with a licensed professional. Welcome to the High at 9 News Hour, where you will hear from cannabis industry experts and professionals from around the country talk about important topics while shining light on global issues and discussing cannabis as it relates to politics, regulation and reform, data and technology, science, research and medicine, family and parenting, art, celebrities and entertainment, fitness, sports, mental health and wellness, and plant-based medicines and entheogenics. Together, we are building a stronger community, fighting the stigma and creating change. With your hosts, Jason Beck and Rico Lamitte, joined by special industry expert correspondents from around the country, and daily antics brought to you by Cannabis. Coming to you live every Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time and high noon on the East Coast. And thank you all for getting high at 9 with us. Oh, yeah. Good morning, everybody. That's right. It is Thursday, March 21st, and today is National Memory Day. That was always a fun
You remember that,
game.
Jason?
Yep, I do remember that. Yes. Oh, man, this is going to be, Rico, you're going to love this. It's National Spray Tanning Day.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Get your boots ready.
Yeah, that's right. It's absolutely Incredible Kids Day. So I guess if you're not an incredible kid, it's not a day for you. And National Countdown Day, on top of National French Bread Day and National Rescuer Day. A shout out to all the rescuers out there. Yes, because everyone needs to get rescued, apparently, in Joe Biden's America. But nonetheless, thank you for joining us and getting high at 9 with us. It's also high noon on the East Coast. And please remember to like, share, and subscribe to us on all social media platforms. You can look somewhere on your screen to see exactly where we live on the internet. And we are live every Monday through Friday on YouTube, Rumble, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and on our very own website at www.highat9news.com. So welcome to everyone joining us from any one of those platforms. And kicking it off today, that's right, we have the dope dad himself, Mr. Rico Lamitte, who looks like he's sitting right next to me, but he's really not. That's right, it is the dope dad himself, Mr. Rico Lamitte. Look at, see, you got claps today, bro.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah,
I like it. Jason,
claps.
you're looking dapper today. I must say so myself.
Well, you know we're hosting an event over here today.
Yeah,
You're probably going to come by. We have the Minority Cannabis Business Association over here from 10 to 3 today. Yeah.
Yeah, of course you wouldn't tell me, Jason.
I just did.
Either way, speaking of people not telling other folks, and in honorarium
I have a history.
National,
I have a history of not.
Was it National Memory Day?
Just for
is it Remembrance Day? Whatever. What was it called?
It's
Jason?
Memory Day. It's like your memory. Yeah, it's like your memory, not like the game, but your memory.
Speaking of National Memory Day, HHS Secretary Javier Becerra could not remember if cannabis was currently a Schedule 1 or Schedule 5 drug yesterday. Should we be concerned? Now, last August, under Becerra's leadership, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services made a recommendation to the DEA that cannabis should be reclassified from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 under the Controlled Substance Act. The news sent shockwaves through the nation. Nonstop debates ensued over whether rescheduling or descheduling would be the best path forward for the industry and continue to this day. After President Biden became the first president ever to mention cannabis federal reform at his State of the Union address earlier this month, even though it was kind of didn't, and he kind of lied, and he kind of, we're going to leave all that behind us. The whole thing became inevitable. It's going to happen, but we don't know when. Well, 8 months later, it's almost April 2024, and yesterday, during a subcommittee hearing on his own department's budget request, a dispute over said rescheduling recommendation popped off. And the same dude that made the recommendation and flipped an entire nation on its head forgot if cannabis was Schedule 1 or 5. Cannabis Business Times' Tony Lang reported that Secretary Becerra was in the middle of correcting Republican U.S. House Representative Chuck Edwards of North Carolina, who said HHS's recommendation of was decriminalizing cannabis, when his own memory on the rescheduling process took a stumble. The exchange was during a U.S. House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing on HHS's fiscal 2025 budget request. Despite HHS's already making its recommendation in August 2023, Edward asks Becerra if he thought the declassification of cannabis would make it more available to youth in the U.S., right on Republican brand. The secretary responded by referring to, quote, probably more than half the states in the country where cannabis is already legal for adult use, 24, and medical purposes, 38. He was quoted saying this: "What we're talking about here is, though the federal treatment of cannabis, because federal law treats cannabis differently than most states, and what the president asked us to do is examine where we are with cannabis today at the federal level. And as you are aware, right now, cannabis is scheduled as I'm going to get it wrong, 5 or 1?
Schedule 1.
No, this is what he said. I'm quoting him.
I know. This is so.
1, Maryland Rep. Andy Harris, a rescheduling opponent, said while chiming in. 1, thank you, Dr. Harris, Becerra said, as Schedule 1, which means the most potent and dangerous type of narcotic. Becerra also explained why reclassifying cannabis to Schedule 3 would not decriminalize its use, something many legalization advocates have said time and time again, that rescheduling is recriminalizing. Edwards pressed Becerra forward on the HHS recommendation. I have a real concern that in light of this mental health issues that we have today, that our federal government, the Department of Health and Human Services, and President Biden are considering descheduling a substance that is far more potent today than it was when any of y'all ever used the drug. That will contribute more to depression, suicidal tendencies, schizophrenia, and those types of things." Edwards said that the HHS's budget report requesting more money to treat substance abuse while at the same time recommending cannabis reform seems very contradictory. Piggybacking over those comments, Harris drew attention to the United Nations Single Convention of Narcotic Drugs 1961 treaty, saying that he has concerns with the HHS hugging with both arms this idea of rescheduling cannabis. "Some people think that we would be violating our intentional treaty agreements," he said. Now, given this administration is all in for a treaty agreement with the World Health Organization on pandemic things that would give up our rights to states in a free nation, I'm a little surprised that they want to have this beef with the World Health Organization on a single convention. But I'll leave it at that. Later in the hearing, Representative Steny Hoyer, Democrat of Maryland, the former majority leader, pointed out what he said was another contradiction: tobacco being exempt from the CSA altogether. Good point. Hoyer did not mention that Edwards' home state of North Carolina is the leading tobacco producer in the U.S., according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I think that cigarette smoking is far more lethal and costly to the country and to human beings than is marijuana. Maryland has legalized marijuana by a vote of the people, so I think it is somewhat ironic that we are focused on a less lethal drug, according to the medical community. Hoyer also pointed out that the other states where voters have passed legalization measures, including 15 for adult use cannabis and many more for medical cannabis. The other 9 adult use cannabis states initiated the legalization process legislatively. As a result, where we find ourselves in a contradictory situation between the state's legalization and the federal government's, Hoyer said. Interesting exchange indeed, and thankfully, Hoyer was in the building to back Becerra when he was clearly stumbling all over his words. Now, personally, I don't see any need for panic here, but I do honestly do not know what to make of Becerra missing a wide open layup right here. On one hand, these people are busy and everybody makes mistakes. With the amount of public policy work subcommittees handle at any given time, I'm sure the probability of someone misspeaking on certain issues is pretty high. But on the other hand, bruh, this is your job, man. Pressure makes diamonds and it also busts pipes. And yesterday's situation looked a little bit more like Roto-Rooter than De Beers. You got us all into this situation last August, and in this particular moment, while debating whether or not your own recommendation was valid, you froze. I can see this, whole pothead, short memory loss jokes writing themselves over this one. But what's not a joke is the fact millions of lives will be changed forever once the DEA acts on this one way or the other. So in my humble opinion, Bachera should be ashamed of the gaffe that he made yesterday. And now is not the time for any unforced errors. It's an election year and millions of Americans are hanging on to every word politicians speak, even more so when it comes to issues that they care about and matter the most to them and their families. I got nothing but respect for Secretary Bachera, but along with the respect comes honest critique. Yesterday's performance was not your best. October surprise is 5 months away, and a whole lot can happen between now and then. This was a tough road loss, and it happens to the best of us. Hydrate. Hit the showers, eat good food, and love hard on your family, man. Do whatever you need to get your mind right for this next round, because it's a long trip ahead, and you cannot afford to take any more L's to prohibitionists. So please, Mr. Secretary, do not fuck this up. My name is Rico Lamitte, the dopest dad on the street for High 9 News. What the rest of y'all think about this, man? Man in charge.
I mean, I feel like he's.
I think it's more than a gaffe, man. It's an unforced error.
I think he's been hanging around with Biden so much that some of Biden's smartness is starting to rub off on him. I see the smirk, Rico. I see the smirk. I can see it.
Tells me that this is not a priority inside the Beltway for the Biden administration. I think we all knew that. When they put lipstick on the pig, we're taking all these steps to help, former marijuana prisoners. Bullshit.
Stupidity is
bovine scatology for Yarrow. Yeah, they're not doing that.
Yeah, I think we're making more of a big deal than they are. I agree.
You guys do realize that stupidity is contagious, right?
Herd mentality, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I got a mandated vaccine against that, Jason. And
that's what happens when you storm the Capitol. Herd mentality.
Oh God. Oh God. Oh man. Jeez.
When we talk about the concern about whether revised cannabis policy is going to fly in the face of some of our existing treaties, I would imagine, Jason, that doesn't bother you since Trump doesn't seem to think NATO's an important agreement either.
NATO's not important.
Yeah.
I don't know that this is the biggest deal, to be totally candid with you. Like, I don't know that he didn't get 3 hours of sleep the night before, that his kid isn't in the ER.
This guy has staff. This guy has staffers that are around him 24/7 that are paid like serious money to make sure that he doesn't make these types of blunders, okay? That's your one goal as a staffer, is to protect your boss and make sure that they're not giving up these types of gaffes to the media.
I think it's a problem, but I think it's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is their policies and the fact that they haven't prioritized evolving the federal government's position on some of these things. And frankly, if they did all of that, they could gaff all they want, and I wouldn't care, right? So
I'm gonna leave all the gaffing to the unions for all that gaffing work that they do on construction sites.
Yeah.
Well, for those of us in the industry, everything about this is important. But if you put this in a hierarchy of problems that our country's facing, you have to take a look at this objectively and say, all right, he stepped on his wang. He did that. I suffer from CRS, can't remember shit, so we'll give him a mulligan on this one.
A mulligan?
Inside the Beltway, the issues that we're seeing here just don't get the same traction as the political hot points that they want to throw out there to get the election in their favor. And, they're full of shit, but we're not on the top of their priority list. Let's just be clear here.
I mean, if gaffing was a union organized activity, then who's that guy who was buried under the concrete? I guess then Donald Trump would be Jimmy Hoffa. Donald Trump would be the Jimmy Hoffa of gaffing, right?
Oh God. Oh jeez. Jeez Louise.
Man.
Yeah.
3 out of every 4 words that Trump speaks are gaffes, but so I guess they're not gaffes anymore. So
Trump.
He is the human embodiment of a broken clock.
Trump doesn't give gaffes. He just spits facts to you guys, and you guys just melt like snowflakes.
He is the human embodiment of a broken clock. Every now and again, he says something that's like, oh, yeah, that might be right. But, majority of what he's saying is just utter bullshit. And you know it, Jason.
It's not.
I've never seen somebody whose stream of consciousness looked more like a stagnant pond.
Oh God, you guys are so funny. We're gonna go. Yeah. We're gonna go to a commercial. We're gonna be.
I just took a hit of DMT. Listen to me give a speech, right?
Yes, exactly.
Oh man, that was weird. Hey, you America. Do I look like Sean Connery? Good morning, America. Saman Razani coming to you live from sunny Los Angeles, California with the one and only highest host, Mr. Jason Beck, smoking on the best weed in the world. Did you know that we have an audio-only version of our podcast? You can find it on Apple, Google, Amazon, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. No excuses in 2024. If you haven't checked us out, check it out now. And also, check out what the Prophet's doing in 2024.
Oh my
man,
God!
Your mom dropped you in your head a lot when you were a kid, right?
Man, you guys, I just threw up.
That's the worst way to start this.
Yeah.
I just threw up a little bit in my mouth.
Yeah, exactly.
But, I'm gonna just keep it rolling because that's what we do here. And up next, it's the highest Republican in every room that he walks into. The man known for smoking the best weed in the world wherever he goes. And today's looking quite dapper. I gotta say so myself.
Yes.
It looks like he's about to go on a field trip to Mar-a-Lago on the short bus. Y'all know who it is.
Yes.
Mr. Jason Beck.
Cute. Just so you know, if I was in Mar-a-Lago, I'd be in a TCP black Escalade. Okay, Rico? Just so you know, that's how I get dropped off over there.
Oh yeah, you
Would there be boxes of documents in the back?
There may be boxes of documents in the back, but we don't talk about what we carry around with us, Dale. You know what I'm saying? We just carry a duffel bag.
Yeah, duffel bag boys.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Well, so this story is a shorter one right now. I have a longer one later in the show, but this is a shorter one. I can't wait for you guys to hear this one. The FDA says marijuana has a legitimate medical purpose, you guys. Oh, man. The FDA released a report saying that marijuana does have a legitimate use for medical purpose and recommended that the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency to change its classification from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. In quotes, the definition of a Schedule 1 drug says it has no health benefits to it, and so obviously there's been plenty of research that has documented the multitudes of ways that cannabis can be helpful, said Dr. David Berger with Holistic Relief. Though not all medical community agree, many people swear by the medical effects of marijuana to help treat symptoms or cancer, anxiety, PTSD, and epilepsy. In quotes, it's no longer appropriate to say that there's no medical benefit when there are hundreds, if not thousands, of medical studies that show the opposite, explained Dr. Berger. As a Schedule 1 drug, marijuana is in the same category as some of the hardest drugs like heroin and LSD, which means it's classified as being more dangerous than fentanyl or methamphetamine. In quotes, what happens after is the federal government has made decisions to make as to what they're going to do next, said Dr. Berger. The Department of Health and Human Services formally recommended that the DEA classify marijuana as a Schedule 3 in August of last year after the Biden administration asked them to review how the drug is classified under federal law. And earlier this year, Senate Democrats urged Biden to deschedule the drug entirely, meaning you would not need a doctor's authorization to use medical cannabis. Well, there's a whole lot more that comes along with that with descheduling, and that's what we advocate here for on High at 9 News, is for the full descheduling of cannabis. And the fact that the FDA just came around and said that there's medical value, just I'm sure is sending people like what's his name, Project Sam, in a head spin right now.
Sabet?
Yeah, Kevin Sabet. I'm sure Kevin Sabet is like sitting in his chair just spinning round and round and round in his desk chair today, trying to figure out some tweets to throw up in response to this. But I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about this. This is Jason Beck for the High at 9 News. What do y'all think? Speechless,
well,
huh?
I can remember when marijuana was made illegal in 1970. I was in high school. And Ehrlichman, who worked with Nixon to do this, spilled the beans on him that they made heroin Schedule 1 to go after blacks and marijuana Schedule 1 to go after the hippies, which I consider myself one.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to undo that, it's been a 54-year odyssey here. And we still hear the nonsense and bullshit that keeps coming out to justify why we keep it there, when in fact, prior to 1970, and Molly's grandfather was a physician at the end of the 1800s, and he did tuberculosis, and cannabis opened the lungs, gave you an appetite. The original wasting syndrome was to TB before AIDS, and so it was commonly used. It was a very effective medicine, and up until 1940, when it took it out of the formulary, all physicians knew about it, and then it went away for a while, and now they're trying to bring it back, and you've got to justify what everybody who smokes weed when they're nauseated knows, okay, or everybody who has a seizure disorder and uses it knows what it does, or PTSD. And it's like we're screaming into the wind here against people who have their head so far up their ass, that thing in their throat is their nose. It's just hard to even comment about this, how ridiculous all of this is.
Mm-hmm. I agree, Dale. It's utterly ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. And they're advocating for this Schedule 3, which they're going to have full jurisdiction on. They're going to just rampage everybody in cannabis with. But I hate to say I told you so.
Well, I think it's the end of social equity. If that's what happens, people like me that might qualify because of a felon, or Yarrow, you might qualify, you're not going to get a Schedule 3 license to be involved in this. It just ain't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm qualified in multiple jurisdictions. I'm verified social equity in San Francisco, Sonoma County. Depending upon the guidelines, you pick a market, and I probably check most of the boxes. Mm-hmm. I think the news here is not the news. I think the news here is, here's another indication of how slow the government is to acknowledge the reality and to embrace the facts that have been sitting on the table of unambiguous, undeniable, and unrefutable body of knowledge. And what comes up for me is just how many areas, how many places, how many subjects is the government doing this, where they slow roll, they backpedal, they gaslight, they deny, and eventually they go, oh yeah, okay, and I think that's the thing that we get to talk about on the political and news commentary show, is like, where can the government do a much better job? And so for me, that's what comes up when I think about this article, is just, this isn't news. The news is that they're finally embracing some information that a lot of Americans have already understood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is, I can't believe that they're coming out and saying this, and I can't believe that Javier Becerra didn't even mention any of this in his testimony yesterday. Just saying.
Well, they don't want to talk about it.
No, they don't,
because it's not hard to put in front of me. Sue Sisley's study, after all the horse shit she went through to get it done, that smoking weed helps PTSD. Now there's an accepted medical use. That should have poked a big hole in Schedule 1 without having to continue to fight like we do to justify, because, I forgot about Schedule 1 or 5. That's a kind of head up your ass gaff that makes all of us shake our head, because the nonsense that keeps getting thrown in there, let's define it one way or define it another way. We have at least a 5,000-year written history of what this plant does. Mm-hmm. There's never been a kid born with 3 arms you say, weed caused that. Addiction was never the concern. That was with, opium and things like that. So refuse to go back and look at the efficacy and the safety of this with 5,000 years of written history. Just tells me you don't want to look at this. You just don't want to do it.
I agree. They want to pass the buck and just skirt it off and expend all of the political capital that all the activists have built up over the years to get us to this point, and then they're just going to blow their load on Schedule 3, and it's going to be a big fat mess, and no one's going to want to clean it up.
And they're going to want us to thank them profusely for it.
Exactly. They're going to grandstand around like, oh, they did this great thing, and all they did was just basically muzzle everybody. It's a shame.
Yeah.
It's a shame. But on that, we're going to try to get to a happier story, but probably not, because we're going to go right on to Mr. Attorney Dale Schafer. That's right. He's everybody's favorite Tio Loco, and he is the founder of Armada Law Practice, and at one point in time did some time for a cannabis crime. That's right. It is none other than attorney at law, Mr. Dale Schafer.
Good morning, everybody. And again, I remind you, I'm off my meds and I'm unsupervised, and Yarrow and I we caused more trouble.
I saw
Start
Heather
bar
there.
Fights and shit like that.
I saw Heather over there today. I think you're supervised still.
My story comes out of England, the UK, and it seems that they play as many games and semantical games, especially with cannabis and hemp. And there's a company over there that was importing CBD oil, and I don't know where it came from, but they were importing it, and then they were cutting it and making different strengths of CBD. But as we all know, if you extract it from the plant, it comes along with some THC. Okay, so in England, instead of 0.3% THC, it's 1% THC. If you got 1% or less, it's hemp. You know, the worst weed I ever smoked back in the day still had 3% or so. So 1% really doesn't get you high any more than taking cough syrup does. So anyway, there was a part of the hemp law or the drug laws there that said if you intend to instill or put into somebody a controlled substance, and the substance is outside of the hemp laws. So somebody in government decided, well, we're going to find that if you have THC in this and you can't prove it's intended to administer THC to people, we're going to prohibit the importation of this stuff. So they did it. And this company was getting 90% of its profits from the CBD products it was selling in England. And all of a sudden, they're out of business. Okay. They got a little pissed. Now, I don't understand all the court structures in England. So I'm going to tell you sort of what I understand in America and how it applies there. It looks like they went to the administrative law system, which is what we do when we're fighting the DEA. You go in and say, this was stupid, we want it to be overturned. And the government admitted that, yeah, we got a little overzealous here. And really, with its less than 1% THC, you don't have to prove that it's there to administer THC to you. It's hard to get it out. If you ever work for any companies that do this, you can extract CBD out, but to try to get all the THC out of it, it's difficult, if not impossible. So people don't do it. And that's sort of where they left it. And the court said, okay, what you did here is probably actionable in court. So they allowed it to go to the next court, not the administrative court, but the civil courts where, you could be banged for some damages here. Now, I don't know how they attribute liability to the government in England, whether they're immune or things like that. But we're going to find out, because if this company lost 90% of its income because some bureaucrat decided that, here's a technicality, we're going to prohibit your entire business because we're reading something this way, I think that they should be spanked for some losses here. Because those of us trying to maneuver within these semantical games, okay? And I don't know how you actually do this when the next person looking at it is going to have a different opinion about what some phrase or terminology means. We just don't have consistency. And I hope that as this goes forward, that government in England gets spanks and has to, reimburse these people some to make them whole for what some idiot did playing semantical games over hemp versus weed. So it isn't just us. It looks like other places that are what we call, Western democracies, liberal democracies, have their head up their ass about as much as we do over cannabis and hemp. So I'm going to throw it back to you guys. What do you think about this? And I don't think we can feel alone in stupidity over, cannabinoid laws.
Well, Dale, I can tell you this much. I did not realize that that Kim Rivers had been lobbying in the UK.
She's been getting it in, man.
Apparently, she has been lobbying. I mean, because the it's going down in Florida based off of her accord, and I was not under the impression that she was lobbying in the UK for the same thing.
Well, I'm going to be interested to see how this rolls out and see who actually is involved here and doing what. But, this will, I don't know if it's going to teach anybody any lessons in the UK, because stuff like this in our country doesn't teach policymakers much. So, like Becerra, you couldn't understand was it Schedule 1 or not. You ask the typical policymaker, what's the difference between hemp and marijuana? They don't know what the hell they're talking about either.
Very true.
It's all Mitch McConnell's fault.
Why is it Mitch McConnell's fault?
Hemp bill. Cannabis is cannabis, man. This is not a scientific nation. America doesn't respect what science is.
It's the drafters of the law. I mean, they defined it as cannabis sativa L, which is the same definition as marijuana in the Controlled Substances Act, Rico. So it's all the same thing.
With the H, you want to go back to prohibition.
I don't think it's defined. I don't think it's defined.
Language matters, and this can lead to appeal later on down the line, because semantics and syntax do matter.
I don't think there's an H in any of it.
Lawsuits down the line.
I don't think there's an H in any of it.
I'm saying
it's the only state that I know
like that, and you want to draw upon science. Let's talk about science, and scientifically, it's all cannabis, right?
The only jurisdiction that I've seen that used the H lately was New York.
Interesting, huh?
Just saying. Maybe the H is for all of the haters out there on their free and open market that they actually have.
I'm all about love. You know what I'm saying? Call me Rico Love. That's me.
What do you think about this, Yarrow? You're pretty quiet over there today. You're normally not this quiet.
Well, look, my wife's family's from England, so I've been trying to hold my fire. Look, there's a lot of the great things that England does well. Rock music. They don't do dental care very well. Their food is not in the top 5.
Yeah, they don't do dental well, that's for sure.
They don't do dental well,
and
so
well.
this is a cavity on their front tooth.
Yeah.
On their cuspid or something like that. It's troublesome for me. And I was watching a Guy Ritchie show on Netflix recently, and I noticed that a lot of his recent shows or movies have been sort of an amalgamation of themes he's used in the past. And this one was about a boxer and a cannabis grow, and it's hard for me to understand that there's this country that allows unregulated cannabis to be so valuable because it's not accessible. And I just think that's really not very evolved. It's just another, like, if we hadn't succeeded from them over tea, we definitely would be succeeding from them over weed, because they're just not getting it right. And it's too bad, because I think it's a great country. They've got some great people over there. You see how I channeled your little orange Cheeto there, Jason?
That's cute. That's cute.
And some of them are good people. So some of them. I don't know why they're so behind the curve. When I think about countries that are really not embracing the newer paradigms, the two that come up for me are Japan and England. And I'm not sure who gains from this and why they're so entrenched in old thinking, but it's painful to see.
I think it's because both countries drive on the wrong side of the road, and the cars are all backwards too. So,
well, I will say
along with the same theme.
There are a couple things. There are a couple things that Englanders do very, very well. Okay, then I do want to give them a little bit of credit for this.
Marmalade. They do a darn good marmalade.
Tea time.
Hats, women's hats.
Tea time.
Women's hats.
Women hats. Yeah, women hats. Yeah, marmalade. And you can't forget crumpets.
So my wife is pretty darn English. Her whole family, very English. And I have to tell you, Jason, I know I'm an American because I'll take an English muffin over a crumpet.
English muffin. I see what you did there. That was very cute right there.
Double entendre, right?
Yeah, his little English muffin top. I see.
If my homeboy back in Chicago, he's like the heir to the Thomas Muffins family. The English muffins. Yeah, shout out to English muffins, man. They fucking fantastic. I haven't had one in years.
Hey, let me know if he needs another judge for the annual Nooks and Crannies competition.
Oh,
because I can throw some butter in there. I can get some cream cheese. I could Jewish it up and throw some lox on there. I'm even willing to go extra English and throw some orange marmalade on there. But I do like an English muffin.
Doesn't Thomas's English muffins? Don't they have a contract with McDonald's too? Aren't those the same rolls that are used in Egg McMuffins?
I don't know.
We don't eat there, Jason.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I do
Only Trump and you are into the fast food.
I don't eat fast food. I'm just asking you guys a question. I'm asking you guys
we're talking about English munchies right now. I know Yarrow's thinking about putting some
with nooks and crannies.
Yeah, it's nooks and crannies.
Another double entendre.
Yeah, we're gonna let
Nutella in his nooks and crannies and all up on his matzo
right there with that muffin.
Yeah, we're gonna let
your muffin has nooks and crannies.
Up the matzo balls all day.
Yeah, we're gonna go to a commercial while Yarrow butters up his nooks and crannies. The Control Tower from Highly Educated has perfected the dab. Utilizing the concept of thin film evaporation, you can waste none of it and taste all of it. The micro texture of the SE pillar increases nucleation at elevated temperatures. And with the tower propelling at 2,600 RPMs, it's certainly the most efficient dab experience to date. The Control Tower from Highly Educated. Bro,
oh my God.
Stop whatever you're doing, especially you, Yarrow. Stop whatever you're doing. Make sure you hit that like button. I know you appreciate it. We'll appreciate it. Yarrow will definitely appreciate it because you'll get in his nook and cranny. And also make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed already. And all of the articles that we cover on today's show, you can read on our website at www.highat9news.com. And today here at the studio, we are hosting the Minority Cannabis Business Association today for one of their events. And so if you are in the area and want to learn more about them, I do encourage you to stop by and say hi.
I'm Jason Beck, and this is Smoky Vanilla. And if you want to feel as good as I look, then you need to get yourself a stretch and smoke with Smoky Vanilla.
That's right, baby. I'm Smoky Vanilla. With my background in kinesiology, I'm a sports massage therapist and stretch coach. I focus mostly on athletes who have chronic pain or injury due to their sport, or the legends of the chronic in the game, baby.
Oh, yeah, you know what it is. We just stretched, and now we're gonna smoke, because you know what it is.
That's right. I love intuitively creating a session based on the individual I'm working with. We'll go through a few assessments, look at the past health history, injury, or anything that's still affecting you today, and create a customized session just for you. Let's go.
This second generation cultivator is the man behind Special Teams Consulting, and I used to think the Special Teams had to do with football, but this morning, I think it got something to do with Dianne Feinstein. But I'm not gonna go there. Up next, y'all know who it is, Yarrow Kubrin. What you got for us today, Sage Master Sage?
Good morning. Thursday, March 21st. Hi at 9 viewers, thank you for joining us. Always great to be here with my esteemed co-panelists. My article today falls under the category of science and health. It's about organ donations. Anytime I have an opportunity to talk about my organs, I'm a happy camper. Organ donations from marijuana users pose no significant infectious risk, study finds. A new federally funded study examining the possible risks of organ donations by marijuana users found no indication that recent cannabis use increases the likelihood of significant side effects in the year immediately after transplant, even as many healthcare providers continue to restrict transplants to cannabis consumers. Findings of the research, which looked at rates of infection, transplant failures, and death among recipients, suggest that organs from donors with a history of recent marijuana use do not pose significant infectious risks in the early post-transplant period. Despite concern that donor exposure to marijuana increased the risk of fungal infections in recipients, our study found that a donor history of marijuana use did not increase, 1, the likelihood of donor culture positivity, including respiratory cultures, or 2, the risk of early recipient bacterial or fungal infection, graft failure, or death post-transplant, authors wrote. Even when evaluating only lung recipients, there remained no association between donor marijuana use and the risk of post-transplant infection. As more states have legalized marijuana, reported rates of use among adults has also risen, notes the new study published late last month in the American Journal of Transplantation. It is likely that a growing proportion of deceased organ donors have a history of marijuana use as well, it says, though this metric has not been specifically reported. Our data suggests that organs from donors with a history of recent marijuana use do not pose significant infectious risk in the early post-transplant period. Infections are a main concern. It continues, pointing out that past findings that marijuana leaves themselves can be contaminated with potentially dangerous bacteria and fungi. Inhaled marijuana has been associated with certain infections among transplant recipients, while bacterial outbreaks have also been linked to marijuana use among the non-transplant population. What has been less clear is whether organs from marijuana users could pose significant risk to transplant recipients. Whether a deceased organ donor with a history of marijuana use poses risk to the SOT, the solid organ transplant recipient, has not been clearly evaluated, the paper says, and no studies have determined that the impact of SOT donor marijuana use on donor culture results and the risk of donor-derived infection, DDI, among recipients. The goal of our study, the authors wrote, is to better characterize the infection risks that marijuana use among deceased organ donors may pose to SOT recipients. Conducted by researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, University of California, San Francisco, Temple University, and the Gift of Life Donor Program, the study looked at data from 3 transplant centers in Philadelphia. It included transplants between Jan 1-15 and June 30, 2016, involving organs procured by the Gift of Life program. The research was funded by the National Institute of Health, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and Transplant Foundation's Innovative Research Grant Program. Transplants were defined as coming from a recent marijuana user either if a toxicology screening showed the presence of THC or if next of kin donor information reported that the donor had a history of cannabis use within the last 12 months. Analyzing data from hundreds of organ transplants, researchers assessed 3 primary outcomes: whether cultures from donors themselves tested positive for bacterial or fungal infection, whether organ recipient developed a new bacterial or invasive fungal infections, and whether the transplant resulted in either graft failure or the recipient's death. For each outcome, they found no significant increase in risk involving donors with a recent history of cannabis use. Among donors with a history of recent marijuana use, 79, that was 79 out of the group, 89% of the total group, had at least one positive culture, compared with 264 or 87% among those with no history of marijuana use, it says. For example, on donor respiratory cultures, 76, which was 85% of the donors with a recent history of marijuana use, and 250, 82% of the donors with no history of recent marijuana use had bacterial or fungal growth on respiratory cultures. On both unadjusted analysis and multivariable analysis, there was no association between recent donor marijuana use and donor culture positivity. Notably, the study did not account for the amount or duration of marijuana use by donors. It also had a smaller cohort of lung transplant recipients than past studies, which authors note have shown mixed results. The report acknowledges that relying on interviews with next of kin or donor informants was an imperfect measure of a donor's actual cannabis use, though they added that when we limited the exposed group to those with a positive toxicology screen for THC, there remained no association with donor culture results or recipient outcomes. In conclusion, they wrote, our study demonstrates that donors with a history of recent marijuana use are not more likely to have positive donor cultures, and their recipients are not more likely to develop a bacterial or fungal infection, graft failure, or death in the early post-transplant period in the context of current management. These results suggest that organs from donors with a history of recent marijuana use do not pose significant novel infectious risks to recipients in the early post-transplant period. Current guidance around cannabis use and organ donation is inconsistent. As noted in a recent review by a student fellow at the Petrie-Flom Center at Harvard Law School, the U.S. Organ Procurement and Network defers decisions on transplant eligibility to each transplant center. It says, though, in practice, many marijuana users are deemed ineligible. Many transplant centers prevent cannabis users from receiving solid organ transplantation due to concerns regarding interactions between cannabis and immunosuppressant drugs used for transplant treatment, non-adherence, fungal infections, and neuropsychiatric effects, the review says. But the latest study is among a growing body of work pushing back against that policy. Although larger scale studies are needed to validate these findings, these studies suggest that medical cannabis use should not be an absolute contraindication to solid organ transplantation, the Harvard says. Research has also suggested that THC, a component of cannabis, might actually help to prevent transplant rejection. Oh, that's like a medical mic drop. As for actually identifying recent cannabis use, at least 2 recent developments are expected to allow researchers to test subjects with more precision. Researchers behind a federally funded study recently said they've developed new procedures to enhance the selectivity of a popular forensic test method, allowing better detection of Delta-9 THC and its metabolites in blood. The federal government also funded separate, recently published research identifying a promising new method to test for recent marijuana use. That study, funded in part by the National Institute of Drug Abuse, determined that more accurate methods of testing than currently used is by analyzing the molar metabolite ratio of THC to THC-C00H in the blood. The research is part of a growing call for more precise and reliable ways to measure recent marijuana use and impairment, often around driving, as more jurisdictions legalize the drug. So this is Yarrow Kubrin, High at 9 News. And before I hand this topic and this news story back to my fellow panelists, I wanted to just say that I have been donating my organs to my wife for 17 years, and there has been no recipient rejection. I do think that it is important as we normalize cannabis to make sure that recipients of organs have the widest possible donor pool. And if the science supports not rejecting organs from cannabis users, that is obviously a good thing for patients and people who need somebody else's body parts. This is Yarrow Kubrin, High at 9 News. I'd like to hear what you guys think.
This is one of those, when you find it out, you go, yeah, well, no shit, Sherlock.
This is the best news. The
thought that you would not take someone's heart-lung transplant donation because they may have recently smoked weed is just an incredible question to ask. Then you find out, well, without weed, they have more problems when you don't smoke weed than you do, and it's still a very small problem. It should be the answer to the question, but apparently it's not. The bigger concern is once you put that transplant into a human body, you go on to immunosuppressive drugs. Now, I wouldn't recommend anybody smoke weed when they're on those drugs. So you just do tinctures, you use edibles, how you titrate it, and the route of administration becomes very important. But it should not interfere with your ability to harvest these organs or to transplant them. It just seems this is like, oh, the children. Yeah, well, there's no evidence the children are hurt either. So stop throwing that kind of horseshit out there to stop people from getting their appropriate medical care.
Mm-hmm. I think this is fantastic news all the way around. This is fantastic news for people that want to give organs and would have been discriminated against because of their cannabis use. I've seen that happen. And then also too for patients that need organ transplants, now they're going to have a larger pool to be able to find the organs that they need. But I had a very good friend of mine who suffered from kidney dialysis failure, and he at one point he ended up getting a kidney, and I remember how much they were making him stop smoking cannabis and everything, and cannabis was the devil and all of this and that, and they were going to make him ineligible, and he was going to get dropped back down to the bottom of the list if he didn't quit smoking and this and that. And he ultimately ended up getting that kidney transplant, and everything was good for a while, but that kidney had a cancer in it too, and that ultimately killed him.
But how do you check for that without slicing the kidney open? And that sort of defeats the purpose of putting a whole kidney into somebody.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
And they probably don't have They probably don't have a very good return policy on those kidneys either.
No, there's definitely a no exchange policy, but at the same time too, once you give it, there's no givey backs either.
Yeah.
Well, and the immunosuppressive drugs will put a cancer on steroids, okay, if it's in there. And the person who took it out of was still fighting it in their immune system, but you put it into a recipient, and these immunosuppressive drugs stop the rejection process, and that's the same process that goes and kills cancers or fights against them. So it's sort of a self-defeating circle here. And how do you find a cancer inside of a donated organ without slicing it open? It's sort of the risk you take. But if somebody gets these drugs and you're having problems with them, taking tinctures or edibles to deal with the side effects of the immunosuppressive drugs, I mean, I wouldn't smoke weed, but tinctures and edibles would certainly be something I'd recommend in the medical community for fighting the effects of these immunosuppressive drugs.
I mean, I don't mean to hit below the belt, but if we're going to talk about delivery systems for medical patients, suppositories are probably one of the best ways, especially for seniors and especially for people who might not be familiar with cannabis in general. But jokes aside, I think the challenge here is simply the article that we talked about earlier, which is it's not about the information that's being generated. It's about how quickly does that waterfall into changes in policy. And what this article talks about was how many of these organ donation or organ transplant centers make up their own policies. And so how long does it take before this data filters down and they change those policies, which increases the pool of eligible donors, eligible organs for transplant, and really creates a better outcome for patients? And that's my concern, because if it takes years, that's a problem, right? We don't live in the information age anymore. We live in, there's so much information, people have problems processing it and then taking action based on that new data. And my concern is just that some of these studies could get lost in the noise, steady drumbeat of information. And I mean, at the end of the day, if it doesn't change policies at organ donor locations, then so what?
Yeah, Yarrow, I think you have some really, really great points there. I think we're in more of a new world for all you book aficionados out there. So there's more of a new world than in 1984 that everybody likes to allude to. We got way too many choices and way too much information out there. Like, the more that stories like this get out, the more studies that these drown out the other ones, like, hopefully it will push forward the science instead of the hysteria. When it comes to stuff like this, like Dale said, this is a no-brainer, 100%, no shit. Just like when they lifted the ban on gay and bisexual men donating blood in December, right? Like, all of this mass hysteria, this nation is built on emotion and not off of logic, and we need to move into a more logic-based society when it comes to medicine and people getting access to it.
Good luck with that.
I agree with you.
Good luck with that.
I agree with you on that, Rico. But Yarrow, you know, I agree with you too. The suppositories are a great way. You know what I'm saying? So I just don't understand why more people just don't keister it. I mean, it works for everybody in prison. And we're gonna go to commercial
because we're Americans, and we're a little puritanical, and in other countries that's a more accepted medical delivery. You know, hey, look,
it's changing. You heard about all these kids butt chugging shit, like that's just it's coming, man. It's coming. As our generations continue to die out, man, I think tomorrow will be a brighter day when it comes to suppositories.
I like to keep an open mind. I don't like to keep an open sphincter, and I just think that in general, Americans are a little resistant to that form of receiving medication. But I do think for the senior community, and I'm sorry, the pepper plug, I have to bring your grandfather's sphincter into the conversation, but I do think for the senior community, there may be some resistance to vaping or charging batteries. There may be some resistance to tinctures that taste very herbaceous and have a high alcohol content. There may be some resistance to smoking, and obviously edibles can be hard for people to make sure that they don't overdose themselves. But I do think that fast acting through that digestive system and up the keister is probably the most senior compatible delivery approach for medical outcomes.
So Rico,
when it comes to suppositories, don't hate, dilate.
So Rico, what it really is basically Yarrow is trying to transform everyone's grandparents into conquistadors.
Hey man.
Oh my. Keister doors.
Exactly.
Okay, I see.
You see what I did there? Let's go to this commercial, Adam. Let's go to the commercial.
That was a bilingual booty joke.
There
that
you
was
go.
Hilarious.
Back door.
I'm glad you guys like that. Get ready for the 20-year anniversary celebration of the Emerald Cup. The Emerald Cup will be held at the Henry J. Kaiser Center for the Arts in downtown Oakland, August 17th and 18th. Get your tickets now for best pricing. Cannabis categories include flower, pre-rolls, solventless concentrates, solvent concentrates, cartridges, edibles, topicals, tinctures, and alternative cannabinoids. So enter early for your chance to be a winner at the 20-year anniversary Emerald Cup competition.
Yeah.
We're back, you guys. We're back. All right, you guys ready for this?
You got the quickies, Jason?
Yeah.
Speaking of quickies, I do think we need to start a second show, which is the outtakes of the things we all say when we think the commercial is playing to the viewers and how incredibly less appropriate we become.
Yeah, that's what.
And Yarrow, remember, short arm exam. Teach the short arm exam. Keep you out of trouble.
All right, here we go, guys.
Short arm.
Oh God, here we go. Let me tell you about this reach around, okay? Because the Kansas State House considers a medical cannabis program that would be the strictest in the United States of America. A bill creating what's among the most limited medical marijuana program in the country was introduced in the Kansas State House after several years of failed attempts at creating a program. Kansas is one of the only 10 states that doesn't have either medical or adult use cannabis, and the Kansas House passed a medical marijuana bill back in 2021, but the Senate didn't take up the bill, and there hasn't been any movement on the issue since. Senate Bill 555, they should have done 420 if they were going to make it 3 digits, but introduced in the Senate on Monday, which would launch a pilot program for people with one of these 16 medical conditions. The types of marijuana available, though, will be more limited than in other states that have created medical cannabis programs. It won't allow people to consume cannabis through smoking, vaping, or flavored edibles, but will allow people to purchase cannabis flower, pills, tinctures, patches, and ointments. Pharmacies, not dispensaries, will be the way of the cannabis flower is distributed in the state. And in quotes, it is very important that physician-ordered medication goes through a pharmacist, said Jared Holleran, executive director of the Kansas Pharmacists Association, in a news release. Receiving medication through a pharmacist versus a dispensary, such as in other states, gives patients a needed level of confidence in the prescription with the expert answers to their questions. But these medical people don't know these answers to these questions, you guys. Jeez Louise. The Senate has been the main barrier to the passage of medical marijuana bill over the past couple of years, raising concerns that medical marijuana programs have to be limited enough that it wouldn't potentially lead to adult use legalization. But Senate President Ty Masterson, Republican of Andover, signaled he would be open to a limited pilot program in an interview in January with KSNT TV. In quotes, this bill was written to comprehensively address the concerns legislators had with the previous bills and to ensure that Kansas has the most conservative and controlled medical cannabis program in the nation, said Sam Jones, Chief Operating Officer of Kansas Natural Remedies, the state's largest indoor hemp producer. Well, Kansas. Sounds like little Toto is going to go start a little farm or something like that. But I don't understand how you guys are saying you aren't going to allow people to smoke cannabis, but it says you're going to allow for flower sales. So I'm dying to hear how this is going to work, but I can't wait. And this is Jason Beck for the High at 9 News. What do y'all have to say about this?
Those pharmacists have federal licenses.
Exactly.
Okay?
They're never going to be able to touch it.
No, I'm going to put some flour out along with my birth control pills and my Vicodin. No, it ain't going to happen. That's nonsense.
I agree.
And they didn't have suppositories. They didn't have suppositories on the list. I mean, they're letting us all down here. Come on.
I just don't understand what Attorney General is allowing for this language to float through the Capitol.
Well, if you know it's never going to work, we're on board. If you don't want it to work, so there you go. It's a useless exercise as far as I'm concerned. It's lipstick on the pig, and no one's going to let this happen. But I'll sign off on this, even though the DEA's on the phone. You fucking do this, and you lost your license. Because I know Molly and I fought them over this. They went after her, took her federal prescribing license away for just daring to make a recommendation for weed.
Yep. I just don't get it how so few doctors are trained in this, and it's not part of education in pharmacist school. And so why do they think that these people are going to know better than bud tenders is just asinine to me.
Well, I mean, okay, hold on a second. As long as this industry pays bud tenders about what you would make serving burgers at In-N-Out, and as long as we're going to be dismissive of the Western model of medicine, let's not completely discount all the extra schooling that doctors and pharmacists go through. I don't want to for 1 second dismiss, denigrate,
I wasn't saying that to dismiss.
That those people aren't.
I'm criticizing the curriculum.
Cerebrally I'm criticizing the curriculum.
I'm criticizing the curriculum, Yarrow. It's the curriculum. They're not taught about it, so they don't know about it.
Right, but the reason why it's called a practice, just like Dale practices law, is that these practitioners are still tasked with continuing education and updating their learning and understanding. And I don't want to, for 1 second, paint with such a broad brush that we suggest that some of those people aren't going to take ownership for educating themselves beyond what they learned in college. And
Yarrow, that's what it comes down to. There's the same question that I asked Dr. T last week. I was like, why, how are we at this point where so many doctors, because they do have continuing education that they have to take, but it's selective, is what Dr. T told us. He said it's selective, and they don't have to pick anything about cannabis if they're not interested in it. I think that's the problem there, and it should not be you choose all of these subjects, but you have to ignore something that is a major wave that is going on now internationally in global science. Like global science and global medicine. You have cannabis is on top of everybody's mind, but American doctors just choose to stick to what they know best for some reason.
Well, because they're pusillanimous. I don't want to call them pussies anymore, but they're pusillanimous. They don't want to fight. But I've sat down and talked to pharmacists and physicians who claim I don't know anything about this. And once you mention the first pass effect, the route of administration, what happens when it goes to the liver, it's like, oh, I get it. Okay, so they're not far away from understanding it. They just don't want to. But I've talked to a lot of bud tenders when you ask them, what's the first pass effect? And they stare at you like, well, I don't. What makes this an indica gummy? Well, okay. So, yeah, we've got to, if you want bud tenders to be able to educate, you've got to find people who have at least the foundation to understand how to answer questions for people who are lay people in the industry. That's what's coming in. Doctors aren't walking in asking you about weed. You've got people off the street coming in, and a bud tender will, blow smoke up their ass. But, if you eat this, it's going to keep you up all day. And when you ask them, how does it work that way? I don't know. So the educational part of this for bud tenders, I think, can be stepped up. But you got to pay them more money. You can't have someone that can make more money on Grubhub than working for you and expect to have them be educated.
Dale, I don't usually do shameless plugs, but my company does that shit. So happy bud tenders. We actually do that bud tender training. We're working with some of Jason's favorite people, the unions out on the East Coast, making sure that these folks do have that right information when it comes to the medical side, the chemical compounds and how they build up everything behind the plant. Because whether we like it or not, they are pharmacists and they're giving out medicine to the public. Right, like all these folks going into dispensaries, especially using it as medicine for whatever reason, they need the proper information. They can't be out there telling people to use this, use that, when they have no idea what kind of ailments that they have. It's not connected to anything in their brain. They're like, oh, you take this OG, that's going to help. This OG is excellent for knee pain. You know, you can't be having that. And it's a major liability for a lot of these dispensaries, and it needs to be addressed before we have some tragedies going on.
I'm totally with you on that, Rico. That's for sure.
We got for this last one, Jason.
All right, here we go. I think this is some good news, and I'm really glad we got Dale on here because we're going to need some legal expertise on this, Dale. You're going to love this. Pow, pow, bang, bang, because a Warren County district attorney seeks a preliminary injunction in a lawsuit over guns and medical marijuana. That's right. The Warren County district attorney wants a judge in federal court in Erie to rule sooner rather than later in its potentially precedent-setting case that seeks to upend federal law over gun possession and the use of medical marijuana. Rob Green is seeking a preliminary injunction that would halt a federal policy that prohibits him from having a firearm as long as he has a Pennsylvania medical marijuana card. Green wants a preliminary injunction in place while Pittsburgh-based U.S. District Judge Kathy Bison considers the lawsuit that Green and the Washington State-based Second Amendment Foundation filed in January in U.S. District Court in Erie. They are suing the United States government, Attorney General Merrick Garland, and the directors of the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The suit is over the federal law that prohibits the users of marijuana, including medical marijuana, from having firearms, even if a user's state has legalized medical marijuana, as have Pennsylvania and 37 other states, as well as 3 territories and the District of Columbia. Green, a Republican first elected in 2013, said in December that he would not run for re-election when his term expires in 2025. He said he would advocate for legalization and regulation of cannabis, and the advocacy expanded into court while the filing of his lawsuit on January 23rd and with his request for a preliminary injunction. The lawsuit asked Bison to permanently enjoin the enforcement of the marijuana-related prohibition. The suit claims the ban violates Green's Second Amendment rights to bear arms, and in his motion for a preliminary injunction filed on Tuesday, Green requests that Bolson block the ban temporarily as she considers his underlying lawsuit. The request for a preliminary injunction is all but certain to result in more court attention to Green's case, and a lawyer with the U.S. Justice Department filed the notice on March 7th that he is representing the government in the lawsuit. The notice said he was waiting to be served with the suit before he answers it in court, and the government now will also have to respond to the more pressing request for a preliminary injunction. Green's lawyers are arguing that a preliminary injunction would halt the irreparable injury to Green's constitutional rights due to his inability to possess weapons at the same time he uses medical marijuana, according to a brief filed with the motion for the preliminary injunction. And Green got a medical marijuana card in May of 2023, according to his suit. The suit provides no information on his health, and Green and others who use medical marijuana, in quotes, are currently being deprived and would continue to be deprived of their fundamental right to keep and bear arms, according to the brief for the preliminary injunction. And Green, the chief law enforcement officer in the largely rural 38,000 resident Warren County, is abstaining from buying or possessing firearms to avoid prosecution, according to the brief. It states that 500,000 Pennsylvanians who use medical marijuana are prohibited from having guns under federal law. And the conflict between state and federal law exists because marijuana is not legal nationwide, and it remains a Schedule I drug along with other substances, yada, yada, yada. Green's brief also states that he is not seeking to use firearms while under the effects of medical marijuana, and he is solely seeking an ability to purchase, possess, and utilize firearms and ammunition when not utilizing doctor-recommended medical marijuana. No different than a patient that has been prescribed such painkillers as diluted diamorphine, hydrocodone, morphine, oxycodone, according to the brief. And it states that Green has never used medical marijuana while in his official capacity as a district attorney. And the group believes the case is a first of its kind. Hold on, it gets better, Dale. Hold on. The Second Amendment Foundation Executive Director Adam Kraut, a lawyer who is representing Green, said in an interview that the case is the first of its kind that he knows of the challenges that federal firearms prohibition in the context of a medical marijuana card. And in quotes, he says, due to the law, individuals are placed in untenable situations of having to choose whether to use a medicine recommended to them by a doctor to treat their symptoms at the expense of their Second Amendment rights or exercise their rights at the detriment of their health, Kraut said in a statement. And he also says, having to make such a choice is simply wrong, and we look forward to vindicating the rights of these affected. The Second Amendment Foundation is a plaintiff with Green in the suit, along with a resident of Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, James Irie, and he was added as a plaintiff in an amended lawsuit filed on March 6th, and the case is docketed in the U.S. court in Erie because Warren County, the home of Green as the lead plaintiff, is one of 7 northwestern Pennsylvania counties with the Erie division of the Pittsburgh-based U.S. District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Dale, man, I think this guy has a case. What do you think about this?
Well, the first thing that they look at is your likelihood of success on the case, because if you're arguing that I have a Second Amendment right and there's irreparable harm being done to me, you've got to at least make a facial showing that I'm going to probably win on this case if we go into a substantive battle. And the Supreme Court made it very clear that they're going to look historically on how the Second Amendment was treated with respect to not allowing people to have guns with certain conditions, okay? And historically, there was none of this until recently, okay? In the recent history of this country, where now all of a sudden, if you use an illegal drug, now we're going to ban you, as opposed to using that same drug that you acquire legally. There's a lot of nuance in here, but I would expect that this judge would take very seriously slapping this with a preliminary injunction to stop this now, which is going to put ATF in a tither, because now they're going to have to take a look at that form that they make you fill out. And what do you do about that? Because it asks you, are you an illegal user? And first of all, I think that's a Fifth Amendment violation, but I think that there's a good chance they're going to get a preliminary injunction here, and this is going to move forward. And they may even go on to a bigger hearing about a permanent injunction to stop them, as part of arguing this violates my Second Amendment. It then throws the ball into the government's court to prove that this is necessary for them to carry out a very fundamental government purpose, okay? And they can't connect those dots. You don't have to stop people smoking weed from getting a gun to fill out any fundamental, governmental purpose here. That's horseshit. Well, I'll be interested to see how they parse this out as it goes through the system. I think the Supreme Court's going to just tear this shit up and throw it out and go, you guys need to start over again.
Really? You think that you don't think that they'll rule on it?
Well, first of all, there's a long ways to go. We're at the district court level here. And I think a district court judge, given the precedent recently set by the Supreme Court, that if you can't prove historically this is what we've done with the Second Amendment, we're not going to let you do it. Okay, well, I don't think the government wins that battle.
Well, let's just say the government argues that battle. Do you know what I would argue as a counter argument to whatever their argument would be, Dale? Is the fact
you would argue?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, I would argue the fact that that if we're going to go back to that and make the forefathers as the measurement of whether or not substances or whatnot, we all know that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson used to host a seed exchange at the White House and grew hemp, which is all the same definition of cannabis sativa L. So therefore, it's all the same thing, and they were growing it, and so they definitely didn't have a ban on it with guns back then if they were growing it.
Let's not even say they weren't growing shit. Their slaves were growing shit. Their slaves were growing all that.
Oh,
stuff.
there we go.
Let's keep it above.
Okay.
There we go.
But the issue that the government's going to face is that the first time marijuana was federally illegal was in 1937. That was a couple days after we started this country, okay? And the first time that they made the use of an illegal substance a reason to take away your Second Amendment rights is when the since I became an adult, which is a long time ago, but not near like 1937. So this is all very recent stuff to say that, oh, this justifies taking away our Second Amendment rights. Based upon what the Supreme Court has said, I don't think they have a snowball's chance in hell if the court applies the Supreme Court's precedent here. Okay, but we'll see. I would hope they would throw in a preliminary injunction out there and halt this shit and make the government go, oh my God, what happens if we lose this case? And maybe accelerate the DEA getting out of the way and moving this over to ATF or something like that. But I think it's all going to be part of this crumbling, because I think if the Supreme Court gets the question of what do we do with marijuana, Clarence Thomas has already signaled what he's going to do. I think he has enough of a majority on that court that'll say, this has got medical purpose to it. What you did, they're not going to say horse shit. They'll use the King's English here. But they say this is not supportable, and all this stuff violates people's constitutional rights to freedom, and throw it out.
I love that.
Yeah, that would be the
On that
best.
note,
That's how we would
I think
win.
we should wrap it up.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so thank you all for joining us for yet another very, very energetic episode of High at 9 News. You can catch us live weekdays, 9 a.m. Pacific, high noon on the East Coast. A big shout out to the Superfans showing love, getting their comments posted live on the big screen to our live audience and online supporters. Catch us across all media platforms. Tune in each day to the Headlines of Chaos, also known as the developing cannabis industry. Big shout out to our vetted correspondent team tuning in from all over, bringing us much needed variety of perspective and your respected opinions to the table. Our production team, Cloud Media Partners, all the sponsors keeping the lights on and AV struggles to a minimum. Word on the block is that a little bird of a feather is back in the studio today. And there's all kinds of white droppings all over the place. Clean that shit up, Adam. What the fuck? Nah, just kidding. As always, Cannabis Sativa, the reason we show up to read these stories every single day, thank you too. It has been Thursday, March 21st, 2024. Show's over. You've all been blessed with the top industry headlines. Hope was enough for you to put in your pipe and smoke at least until tomorrow. My name is Rico Lamitte, the dopest dad on the street for High at 9 News, cannabis industry's #1 daily news show. And we're going to give this one to Yarrow, who had a very, very, very interesting day today. Take us out.
All I got to say is it is a pleasure to participate in a show so lively, so current, and so relevant as we cover the 24-hour news cycle. Come back tomorrow to hear the other esteemed panelists and guests, and come back on Monday to hear me rant, rattle, and rave. And thank you, Jason. Thank you, Rico, for having me. And Dale, thank you for tolerating me.
Love you, brother.